Hey there, my name is Christian Verwijs and I'm one of the creators of the Scrum Team Survey. In this video, I want to show you how to get the most out of the team insights that we show in the team report. As you know, we created the Scrum Team Survey to help Scrum and Agile teams improve continuously. We use data to make that possible. And we collect this data with questionnaires and we then present it to you in a number of different visualizations. The one that you're seeing in the screen is one of those that we think is the most helpful. But in this video, I'll help you make sense of how to actually understand the model and how to use the model to start really important conversations about actual obstacles, but also actual improvements, which is ultimately what we want teams to do. Now, before diving into the model, let me give you a bit of background about what you're seeing in the first place. I've gone through one of the team reports for a demo team, and this is the team insights that you can access with the Insights button on the left. Now, for this particular team, we've already done a couple of snapshots, so the team members have already entered the questionnaire a couple of times over the past year, so we have some data, some historical data to reference. We also have a benchmark selected, which is the top 100 most effective teams. We're comparing the results to the previous snapshot, which is from January 3rd. And there's also a color coding happening here, which is explained here. If it's red, then the score has gone down since the previous measurement, the one from January 3rd. If it's yellow, then it's remained the same. And if it's gone up, if it's green, it's improved. And of course, that's a good thing. You can also tweak the settings a little bit here. Right now, the view that we're using basically colors the factors based on the results from the previous measurement on January 3rd. But you can also pick another comparison mode. You can also say, let's compare it against just the benchmark, which is set to the top 100 most effective teams. And if I change it now, you'll see that the color coding will actually adjust because in this case, the factors in red are lower than the benchmark. The ones in green are higher than the benchmark, and the yellow or orange ones are comparable to the benchmark. Now, in this case, we've picked a really ambitious benchmark, top 100 most effective teams. So you'll see that there's nothing green in our model. It's either orange or red, which means that compared to the most effective teams, we have a lot of improvements to make. But you can also pick a less ambitious one, like just most teams in our database. And then the picture is a little bit better. Some green areas, but mostly orange. And you can also pick many other benchmarks. Do note that this option is only available for subscribers. So if you can't find this option or it's disabled for you, then you need to get a subscription to actually enable it for you. But this basically gives you another way to basically make sense and have a reference point for your data. But in this case, we're going to use the previous period or snapshot as the reference point, because ultimately your own team is the best benchmark, and then your own team in the past is the best benchmark. Now, what are we seeing here? There's a lot of data here, so let's first get an overall sense of what we're seeing and mostly the model behind it. Like, how does that actually work? Because it's quite a lot of information. What's important is that we start on the right, which is the outcome essentially of the model. Ultimately, the thing we're after as Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, team members, and also the people around teams is that we want teams to be more effective. Now, what does it mean for a team to be effective? The way we're measuring it in our platform is based on existing research about high-performing teams. And we're basically saying, okay, an effective team is one that has happy stakeholders, stakeholder happiness. Stakeholders are getting a lot of value out of the team. And the members of the team are also happy with the process by which that value is created for stakeholders. So that's team morale. So basically, it's happy stakeholders, happy team members. And together that combines into a score for team effectiveness. That's sort of the outcome of our model. What we know from our research with over 2,000 teams that this effectiveness is shaped by 5 core factors. And those 5 core factors are presented with the big circles in the model. The first 2 are just immediately before team effectiveness. The first one is stakeholder concern, which is over here. And this is the degree to which teams understand the needs of their stakeholders and what is valuable to those stakeholders. And stakeholder concern is composed of a number of lower order factors: shared goals, feedback gathering, value focus, stakeholder collaboration, and the responsiveness as experienced by stakeholders. Now, the labeling may be a little bit different in your team insights because the model that I'm looking at right now is based on an agile team, not necessarily a Scrum team. And then we're changing the labels to make sense for agile teams. But if you're just working with Scrum teams, this will say sprint goals, this will say sprint review, and so on. So that you may see a small variation in the language, but the questions are actually the same, except for one label, sprint review, is flipped with something else. But you can sort of compare the results. So stakeholder concern is one core factor. Another one is responsiveness. And that's the degree to which teams are able to respond quickly to emerging needs from stakeholders or just discoveries of their own, things that they're learning as they're doing their work. And responsiveness is composed of release automation, refinement, the actual release frequency, but also the experience of stakeholders of the release frequency. And is it enough for them or is it too low? Now, again, some changes are possible here because if you have a team that doesn't develop software, which you can select, then we won't show release automation. But generally, these are the ones that are shown under responsiveness. And together, they compose the score for responsiveness. Now, as you can see, there are a bunch of arrows, and the most important ones are right here. Stakeholder concern has a big positive influence on team effectiveness, and responsiveness too. These arrows are based on our research, and they sort of show the general effects that these things have on team effectiveness. So we know that stakeholder concern has a strong positive influence, and so does responsiveness. But stakeholder concern can also boost responsiveness by making it easier for teams to recognize and see why it's important to be responsive. Because if you understand what your stakeholders need and what they're looking for, then it makes sense to become more responsive to those needs. And this in turn may drive release automation, refinement, and so on. So that's how these arrows work. Now, one way to summarize this is that stakeholder concern and responsiveness are essentially the core of agile software development or the Agile Manifesto in general. But in our research, we also looked one step back. We also asked ourselves, okay, what is necessary in the environment and in the processes of teams to actually make it possible to focus on the needs of stakeholders and to be responsive? And that's when we get to continuous improvement, which is another core factor. And this indicates the degree to which a team operates in an environment that encourages learning and has safety, where people can take risks, where they can try new things, and also where there is an opportunity to reflect periodically and openly about how things are going to identify improvements. And you can see there are a lot of lower order factors beneath this one. We'll actually jump into what the scores mean in a moment, but let's first take a look at the model in general terms. You can see that there's concern for quality, retrospective quality, learning environment, psychological safety, whether or not there is a lack of team conflict. This is a flipped item, so a low score is actually bad, a high score is good. And shared learning, which is the degree to which teams are learning together with others in the organization. And finally, the usage of metrics, and stakeholders, the quality that they are experiencing from teams. Now, together that composes into a score for continuous improvement. Another factor that we identified is called team autonomy, which is the degree to which teams are able to make their own decisions about how to do their work, in what order, and with what approach. And also the degree to which they have the skills and know how to put those skills together to actually create a product or create value for their stakeholders. And finally, the fifth core factor that we identified is called management support, and that's the degree to which teams feel they are supported by management. Together, these 5 factors explain between 60 and 70% of the score of team effectiveness, and that's a lot, which means in practical terms that if you want to increase the effectiveness of your team, then if you can manage to create improvement in one of these core factors that precede it, then you're very likely to see improvements in team effectiveness over time. So this model gives you a very concrete way to identify the weak spots of your team, but also the strengths of your team, and to improve based on that information. And that's what this Team Insights model is helping you do. Now, one question that we sometimes get from people is, so how does this work as a maturity model? This model is not a maturity model. It's a model that's about processes that happen in teams around stakeholder concern, around responsiveness, team autonomy, continuous improvement, and the support that teams are getting. We don't believe personally in maturity models because every team is different. Every team has a different climate, has different people, has a different environment. And one problem of maturity models is that they present a general flow in which teams mature over time. And that's just something that doesn't really hold up if you look at scientific research. So instead, we're using a team-based approach where we look at the processes that happen in and around teams. And that's maybe a bit more complicated than a maturity model, but we think it's a more realistic way to understand what's happening in your team. And ultimately, it gives you much more solid information about where to improve. And that we can explain about 60 to 70% of team effectiveness actually shows that that's useful. So let's now take a look at how to actually do that. Because in this case, maybe a first question to ask ourselves is, what are we actually seeing in terms of the data? And this is something you can also ask your team. So in this case, what I'm seeing is that team effectiveness has not improved since the previous measurement from January 3rd. I can also see that stakeholder concern has gone up a little bit, and so have some of the lower order factors. Some small decreases, but that's all very tiny. It's not really meaningful. We can also see that responsiveness has stayed mostly the same, but we do see some drops in the lower order factors there. So that's something that we may have to think about. We can also see that continuous improvement has gone down only a little bit, but the lower order factors, at least some of them, have gone down quite a bit. Here, big decreases, 35 points down, 22 points down. That's quite a lot. And in general, all the ones under continuous improvement have gone down except for the experience of quality that stakeholders are getting out of the team, which is good, but apparently that's the only positive thing in this area, or positive improvement in this area. We can also see that team autonomy has gone up, particularly self-management, and cross-functionality has gone down a bit. And management support has also gone up, and that's good news. So the overall picture that emerges from these numbers is that we have some improvements in important areas of the model, but we also have some areas that are of concern and that we should focus on. Particularly continuous improvement, that's a big concern. And this is also highlighted in red by the model and also all the lower order factors. And what we do is based on this, we also determine what tips to give your team. And you can actually see that if you would go to tips, that the top 3 tips, retrospective quality, concern for quality, and shared learning, all have to do with continuous improvement. So what does this all mean? And that's the next question you can always ask yourself and your team. What does this mean to us as a team? If this was my team, I would focus on continuous improvement, no doubt. Stakeholder concern is something we can celebrate. Management support, team autonomy, that's great. Those have gone up. But continuous improvement is a big concern, and we have to start making improvements in those areas. Apparently, for this team, for my team, it's hard to find opportunities to learn. There also appears to be quite a lot of team conflict. Psychological safety is not very high. So apparently people don't feel there is an opportunity or possibility to learn. That's something as a Scrum Master, Agile coach, or team member, product owner, something you really want to focus on. So what does this mean all in practice? Because ultimately identifying that continuous improvement is an issue is the first step towards actually resolving it. What you can do is you can click on continuous improvement. We give you a bit of background here, but we also give you a lot of quick actions. Like these are things you could do like tomorrow or next sprint that are very easy to pull off. Like ask team members to facilitate the next sprint retrospective with a format of their choosing. If you click add as action, it will actually show up as an improvement action over there. And there are a couple more, I think in 5 in total for each factor. And you can do the same for all the lower order factors. So if you, for example, want to focus specifically on team conflict, you can click on team conflict in here. You can see, by the way, that the benchmark is much higher. So there's a lot of conflict in this team. And these are some quick actions. Now, if you want to dive deeper, you can also click on Discover How to Improve. And that will give you tips on how to improve how to reduce conflict essentially in your team. We'll give you a lot of research background, like why is this important? And we'll also give you practical tips, including the quick actions and 2 do-it-yourself workshops that you can run with your team to talk about conflict and how to effectively navigate it. But that's the practical side of how to improve. Now, the picture for this team is quite clear. It's really a focus on a continuous improvement. But sometimes the picture is not that clear and you have a lot of orange all over the place. And well, then the question is, what should we focus on? So one of the ways to do that is to maybe look at different benchmarks. In this case, we're comparing with the previous measurement, but we can also pick another benchmark. In this case, we're picking not a very ambitious one. Most teams in our database, we're going to switch to the most effective teams, or let's pick the teams that are most appreciated by stakeholders. And there too, we can see that continuous improvement is an issue. We also have some other areas that are lighting up in red, like mostly of course, the experience by stakeholders. You can also pick another one, the most effective teams. And here you can see that autonomy in the most effective teams tends to be a bit higher too. So this gives you some information, because if you know that more effective teams apparently have higher team autonomy and have a better climate of continuous improvement, it tells you that if you were to invest in those 2 areas, you're quite likely to see improvements in team effectiveness over time. And what's really useful to know about the model, switch back to this mode for that, is that we know that if you invest in continuous improvement and that increases, then you're going to see positive effects on stakeholder concern, because there's this big fat arrow over there. We also know that there is an arrow, not that big, but there's a strong positive effect on responsiveness. We also know that autonomy, for example, makes it easier to to focus more on continuous improvement. So if continuous improvement is an issue, as it is in this team, and it's difficult to make changes there, maybe you have to take it one step back and ask yourself, is team autonomy maybe the issue in this team? Now, apparently in this particular team it isn't, but in your team it might be colored red, and then it's an indicator that maybe you want to start there. Maybe you want to start by making a space for teams where they can actually take autonomy over their own process and feel like they own it, and that will drive their ability to make continuous improvement. And you can also take it one step further back even, and maybe look at management support, because we know from research that management support enables teams to be more autonomous. It also makes it easier for teams to improve continuously, and it makes it easier for teams to work with stakeholders. So again, if the patterns are not super clear, you can always go back. Start with team effectiveness, then look back. Is stakeholder concern an issue in this team, or responsiveness? If they're not marked in red or even orange, go back one step further. Is continuous improvement maybe an issue, or team autonomy, or management support, or maybe even all of them? But ultimately, the recommendation is to always start small. So don't try to improve everything in the model. Focus on one area, then move to another one. So if management support is an issue, and team autonomy is an issue, and continuous improvement is an issue, maybe you want to start with management support, because management support will positively influence team autonomy, it will positively influence continuous improvement, and it will positively influence stakeholder concern. This reasoning, this sort of process where we always go one step back and ask ourselves, is this maybe the issue, is also how we determine the tips. So in this case, retrospective quality is at the very top, because if we want to increase team effectiveness, if we calculate our way back through the model, if we were to improve retrospective quality, we're probably going to see the biggest increase in continuous improvement, which also has a positive increase in stakeholder concern and has a positive increase on team effectiveness. Not perfect, it's just a prediction. It's only based on the data that we have from your team, so you have to make a decision as a team if this makes sense or not, but that's the tip that we can give you with our tool. And obviously there are many other tips that you can draw inspiration from in each of the areas of the model. Now, if you can't see all these tips, if you can only see the top 3, That's because you don't have a subscription. If you get a subscription, then you will see all of those. So that's basically how you can use the team insights to drive conversations in your team and around your team, and to use it to get better all the time. And that's ultimately what we're after with our tool. Happy improving. Bye-bye.